Let's be real. Starting, running, and scaling a coaching business can feel exhausting. I mean, you've got the marketing, the hustling, the selling, all that stuff you didn't realize you would need to master when you decided to start a coaching business. If you're anything like me, you started your coaching business to change the world, to improve the lives of others while improving your own. Well, the truth is, running a business doesn't have to be as hard as many of us have made it out to seem. And you don't even have to do all that hustling stuff if you don't want to. You really can get into flow, into your zone of genius, and get back to the work you were sent here to do. But you have to ask for help. You have to be willing to work in new ways. You have to be willing to open up your mind to mentors who might be doing it differently than you've ever considered. And you have to be willing to actually implement new ways of thinking and running your business. If you're up for that, stay tuned. I'm Hannah Hermanson, your certified coach, international speaker, author, and yes, the founder of Dream Life is Real Life and the host of this show. And I've been able to help hundreds of coaches build, scale, and enjoy their online businesses. Essentially, make their dream life their real life. And if you'd like help improving your business life and get your coaching business to the next level, we might be able to help you. Head on over to dreamlifeisreallife.com/show to get all the resources and episodes that we talk about in this community. You can join our Facebook community, you can find me on Instagram, but more importantly, if you're really ready to integrate what you learn here today and on other episodes, then you'll be able to set up a complimentary 10-minute chat with my team. Again, at dreamlifeisreallife.com/show, no strings attached. We love getting to know you and seeing what are the right next moves for you. But now let's get on to the show. In this podcast, you'll find the real people, concrete tactics, and weekly motivation and inspiration to make your dream life and business real. I started this podcast to bring you role models that I never had. We talk to successful entrepreneurs, freedom seekers, business owners, and people living life on their own terms. To be a true leader, to create the legacy you desire, and to live in alignment, you need a tribe lifting you up. And I've made it my mission to be your tribe, to bring them to your ears at least, because after all, we are all in this together. Now, let's cue the music. All right, everyone, we are back, and today we have the pleasure of hanging out with a new friend of mine, Jimi Vaughn. Jimi is a passionate and charismatic disruptor whose transformative approach to challenging biases creates high-performing teams and thriving organizations. Growing up in Ferguson, Missouri, Jimi's personal experiences drive him to be a catalyst for change by bridging the gaps that divide people by race, gender, socioeconomic status, and differing abilities. He's a trained professional in human resource development, and over a decade of working for some of the top global brands in the entertainment industry, he has, really become this emerging leader in the D&I strategy. He believes in the ethical responsibility of every decision maker to create an environment where true meritocracy can exist and to afford opportunities for all by breaking down barriers and even the ones that unintentionally limit people just based on identities. So thank you so much. This is such a massive topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to break it down for us, especially some of us who are starting our own businesses or starting to build teams in the 2021 here.
Awesome. I'm super excited. I think it's going to be a really good, conversation, and I'm really, happy that you asked me to join. So looking forward to sharing some information and hopefully some really actionable, steps that people can take and keep in mind no matter where they are in their business process.
Yeah. And I know you're used to working with organizations with dozens or hundreds of folks. And I'm sure a lot of those principles do apply to people who are just looking to hire a virtual assistant or are wanting to be mindful and of diversity and inclusion and equity in the content they create. And so that's what I'm really hoping that you can help us shed some light on. But before we dig into all of that fun stuff, I would love to know a little bit more about your journey into this role. You know, growing up in Missouri, you say that your personal experiences have kind of led you down this path, but talk to us a bit more about really owning your position in the economy or in the industry, I guess,
Yeah.
and really being that owner, that leader and the owner of your own work.
It's really, really interesting because it's always been something that, that I think I was really passionate about. Like, I think even as a kid, I was somebody who always, kind of defended / rooted for the underdog. Right. So if anybody I saw was kind of like on the outskirts of kind of like popularity, and it was funny because by all measures, I should not have been a popular kid like myself. I was kind of like nerdy, had like these big like Coke bottle glasses. I was small, all of that. But it was like I had personality to spare,
You
right?
had the
And
it
so
factor,
it
right?
was, yeah, let's go with that. Right? Or not having the sense to know that was like you're like this tiny human that people
Naivete is
are
a
like,
superpower. I
it
believe in
really
that.
is.
Yeah.
It really is, right? And so I think I was able to kind of like harness that and use that. But then also, growing up in a space, like I said, in Ferguson, Missouri, which has basically been like the epicenter of, the way that we talk about race and Black lives and all that. So that was always like kind of a present constant in my life. And like I was fortunate enough to have parents who, really made sure that that like my siblings and I had, robust education in our own history and in our, our stories and in our power and in our strength and in the value of like that uniqueness that we brought to the table. And so I think that always kind of showed up in whatever I was doing, whether that be in school or in work and all those types of things. So even when I was just in like management positions, it was always a constant of just like, I want to make sure that everybody is included. I want to make sure that, that everybody's being considered and all of those types of things, which is really what's at the core of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? It is about, looking for who's missing, looking, and trying to make sure that you're considering all different, like identities, all different existences, all different backgrounds and things like that. In your, whatever your standardization is of your process, you're thinking about how this is impacting, everyone, or how like the target audience, your potential employees or existing employees, or your client base. So I think, just that reality of life has kind of continued pushing me toward making sure that that was always an element. So yeah, and then, I ended up just really kind of gravitating toward it. And then, especially around the time of, the Ferguson demonstrations, I found, I think, a little bit of a stride in communicating and talking about it in a way that like I started to see things click for people.
Yeah.
And people were like, huh, I'd never even considered it that way, or I didn't think about it that way, or I had no idea that that was kind of like, the cause and effect. Because we tend to come at diversity, equity, and inclusion with our own perspectives and our own understandings and our own, perceptions of what it is, because it's something that we're all experiencing, whether or not we're aware that we're experiencing it or not. Everyone has an identity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion includes that, right? It like it speaks to that, to that existence that is, that can be unique, but can also be shared among, like different groups. Yeah. And then I like met someone who like became a mentor of mine like later on. And she actually was a VP of diversity and communications, I think actually at CBS. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? That can become a job? Like that's an actual job? Whoa. And so, that was really when I was like, okay, I want to go to there. I want to do that thing.
Yeah.
And that's basically how it happened. It's like, I just kind of made sure that I made, the steps to kind of weave that narrative for myself.
I hear that from so many leaders and this is why I also love starting with your story, because there are these strengths, there are these passions, there are these common threads that start early in our lives. And when we're able to bring them to our workplace or our family or all these other roles that we start playing, it can be really empowering. And it often leads to those opportunities that we never saw coming, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you is that like you had this purpose, you had this passion, you didn't know what to call it or where it was supposed to take you, but you kept bringing it to the workplaces and the relationships that you were in and having these conversations. And I think that's a really big lesson for emerging leaders and people who want to go out and do their own thing, is it isn't always, oh, I'm going to be a life coach, or I'm going to be a diversity and inclusion director, or I'm going to be a unicorn, whatever thing you don't even know exists right now. But it sounds like, it really is your passion and some knowing that you must have that you must continue, or you in the past, continue raising this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great way of putting it, of this knowing, because I think even for, like a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are kind of like stepping out, it usually is born from some form of knowing. That's kind of like you have that moment where you click and you kind of like understand, okay, so I do kind of approach this a little bit differently than others. Oh, I do have an angle, that it seems like people are responding to exactly
this way. Yeah.
That not everybody's thinking this way, because a lot of times for us, we can think that everybody thinks this way because it's so natural to us.
And the algorithm as supporting that phenomenon that everyone's doing it. Everyone thinks the way I think.
Everyone's doing it. Exactly. So, so then we end up kind of like underplaying, what it is that we're actually bringing to the table. So that was a big thing for me. And I think that actually started to click, especially around the Ferguson demonstrations, because I was like, I'm engaging in some really, really difficult conversations, and like there are some light bulbs that are going off, and I'm like, okay, and it felt meaningful and it felt purposeful, and so I was like, that's really the drive.
And in that tension and that contrast of, the heat in your hometown, you use that as an opportunity to propel your own career and your own business, or how did you use that? I want to call it an opportunity, but maybe you didn't think of it as that in the moment.
Yeah, in the moment, I certainly didn't.
Okay.
It was like, I didn't think of it as an opportunity at all. I thought of it as a responsibility, more as like, even to a certain extent, an obligation, because it was, kind of difficult, because I ended up actually in a pretty significant depression the year after. So this was like, early 2015. And, I started just being like, because I was trying to engage in every discussion. And I was like, I was losing the energy, right? And it was weighing on me, because also like being part of the target demographic, I was like, why am I having to explain, this, element of like my right to exist or to, operate in these spaces, to people, and especially like people that I've known for many, many years. But it was, after I kind of like got into that, I started thinking, but this is really important work, and I got to figure out a way to balance that. And then I recognized that I think that my skill set was most aligned with kind of like a one-to-many format as opposed to a one-to-one. And I started understanding that with one, some people were better equipped to the one-to-one, and that I could actually step back and let those individuals who had that strength do that thing, right? And engage in the one-to-one. And I could focus a little bit more on, making structural change, and then, in a more of a career type of format. So it kind of just honed it in for me, what that could look like for my particular skill set and my particular experience.
Yes. I think listeners are totally resonating, because as service providers, as folks who want to change the world and improve lives and teach personal development and save people's lives, there becomes this like martyr phenomenon at
Yeah.
some point in that journey where, like you're saying, you have this responsibility and it's on me and I have to show up and do this thing, and it's all of my energy, and I'm on this platform and I'm on that platform, and I have to hashtag this and I have to email that and I have to show up for this call. And, we start to get into that spotlight effect of everyone is like worried about how I'm doing it and I have to please everyone. And then I love the permission really that I hear you giving yourself, which is, well, I don't have to be everything for everyone.
Correct.
I can choose which platforms fill me up. I can find other formats to spread this message. I think probably some of your peers might have decided to write books or start an Instagram account to like get this out. And you've taken more of, like you said, the structural and the career approach.
Absolutely.
Which also reminds me that like we're all supposed to be doing what we want, how we want. Like there are people who are supposed to be baking in Mexico. And like, that's where, and there's supposed to be people who are, laying the railroad tracks. And then there's other people who are supposed to be speaking on stage. And when we try to put ourselves in these other boxes, it does lead to mental health frustrations and burnout. So
100%.
So let's talk about where you are now and some of the things that you're seeing. You've been doing this work for a decade now. So let's talk about maybe some of the themes or things that you're seeing in this collective burnout and exhaustion, where we've been seeing years and years of racial unrest. Now we have a global pandemic. I mean, there's a lot happening. So I'm just curious for you, what you feel like the trends or the most important areas of focus are for, leaders in 2021?
That is actually a really good question, right? So, because you're 100% right. I think that people have gotten, some level of fatigue, and I don't necessarily think that the fatigue is about talking about it. I think it's talking about it and not seeing things happen as a result, right? Or, just not seeing enough movement, or people being like, okay, I get it. We've had the discussion, but what are the next steps? What are the action items? Like, what do you do? Right? Because that can become, like overwhelming, because it is a very nuanced, kind of conversation. Like you said at the very beginning, like it's super big, like it's very broad and it's very wide, reaching. So I always tell people it's just kind of like, you gotta start to break it down into like, smaller parts and to bite-sized pieces, and start to kind of like first, check your perceptions of what you think it is, and then try to match that or align that with, with discoveries of what it actually is. Right. So I tend to start just with the definition of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and kind of, explain what those things are, because we can get into the conversation. And a lot of times we just kind of start thinking about particular elements. A lot of times we think about race, we think about gender, we think about, sexual orientation, and like those types of issues. But it really spans that and much, much more. It's about, like different identities and different, shared experiences. And so many different things can fall into that. That could be based off of the region that you even grew up with, or grew up in, the languages, like that you speak, and how those languages impact how, like how you think, the different types of thinkers, like that we even have, people that are, more creative or more, analytical, process-based or abstract, those all things come into this overall conversation of diversity, equity, generations, right? And the things
like
that
7 billion unique snowflakes. I know you and I both got out of the cold weather, but like,
yeah.
as you're saying that, it really is back to this idea that we are just like 7 billion unique pieces of this massive puzzle. And we fit ourselves together and we do our best to work together. But there's definitely parts of the puzzle that we need some help putting together.
Yeah. And I agree. So I think when we understand that diversity is just that, it is a state of being. Diversity is like what exists. And it is, varied experiences existing in a space, essentially, is what diversity is. Not an action, it is just a thing. And ideally, the end goal is something that is truly, like diverse within a particular area. Then you talk about equity, and equity is about fair treatment, right? It's not necessarily equal treatment, because sometimes, treating everything the same is not fair. It's like you don't judge how good a squirrel is by how well it swims, or a fish by how well it climbs a tree, right? It's, those aren't necessarily fair things. So you want to be equitable in the way that you're, treating, and you want to be inclusive. And that means giving people also agency and being able to weigh in on their own, like experience and different opportunities, and considering all of these different experiences and whatever your process is, which is why we talk about all three of them kind of together, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then sometimes you also might hear about belonging, which is kind of like the measure of how well you're doing in those spaces by how people feel, in result to the activities, that you're kind of bringing to the table. So when you start with understanding that, then you at least, kind of get into your head what it isn't, right? And so then you start to be able to kind of pull together different types of strategies, or looking at like observing in a particular way and creating, kind of just like frameworks that can set you up for success. Because you want to make sure you're setting up a framework to be able to measure your success. Like identify like what is success for you with, I'm trying to be diverse and, or inclusive and equitable. What does that look like? If it's an employee population, is it that people feel like they belong, and that, we've got all kinds of people that feel like this is a great place for me to work? Or in my clientele, do I feel like, do my clients feel that you've considered me and the things that are particular to me in the way that you've created, your products or the services that you're offering? Have you put extra thought into how this, like, not only the issue that it's, that it's solving, but how, like, as far as like the execution that it can solve it for my particular, experience and situation. And, and just kind of make sure that you're keeping those types of things, those goals, like, those intentions on the forefront of, of every activity. And then try to make sure that the activities that you engage in all support that end goal, right? I think somebody who put it really, really well is a person named Brene Myers, and she's the VP of inclusion strategy at Netflix. And she's like, my goal is to make sure that I equip everyone with an inclusion lens, right? She's like, so that everything that you do, you're looking for who's missing. Wow. You're looking for who's being, who wasn't considered or who is considered, and just in everything. So it's not just in this, silo of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is in, as I write contracts, as I create marketing plans, as I, develop my product, as I put language into, like my sales letters, all of those types of things, looking at that with a diversity, or an inclusion lens. And then also adding onto it is like listening with a filter of who's being, who was missed, or who's not present, whose voice am I not hearing? Just when you're, adding that as just an additional step as you're developing and moving forward is really, really crucial. And it helps you kind of issue spot and identify where you can, where you can improve and how you can start to integrate it into your practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll be, I don't know, transparent or straightforward in that I'm so grateful that you're here, because a lot of what we teach when it comes to like marketing and creating programs is that you're thinking about it for one person, and you're marketing to an ideal client, and your people are all pretty like-minded and they gravitate towards you because of your story and your personality. And I was working on a team last year where we were very much about that, right? Like we knew our ideal client, we have this product, everyone goes through this thing. And we got a client who it was visually impaired, couldn't see the program. But she had adapted, like connected with us on social media because of inclusive captionings and, readers on her phone. But when it came to actually like sitting down to do the program, it's all on the computer. And we had to think, a lot about how to translate all these videos and all this computer content that we had for her. And that was really the first time that I had to think about what you just said, is like, who else is this disincluding, right? The fact that we do this and we speak English and we talk to one person and our group is on Facebook, and, like all of that started to really make me question. And I don't have, this is why you're here, because I don't know the answer to this balance between knowing your market, knowing your niche, having that like ideal client and product versus, being diverse and inclusive.
Right.
What advice do you have on that?
So I think that there is a balance of being able to identify, your avatar or your ideal client or your archetype. It's just in how you develop who that person is, right? I think it is about, what elements are you trying to determine about that ideal client? Because there are certain things that are through lines that cross a lot of, different identities and things like that, like shared experiences. So people that are experiencing, similar things. Maybe they're at this point in time in their life. Maybe they are somebody, with children. Maybe, they are in a position.
They're not good enough, or
they think that they're not. Exactly.
Psychographics.
Those are things that are, to a certain extent are universal experiences that can, span the just like the whole human kind of diaspora, essentially. But, when you start to build in certain things that are culturally unique, or, certain things like that, sometimes you have to then start asking yourself as you scale it a bit. Because I do think, for a practical standpoint, because if you try to capture absolutely everything from the very beginning, you may not actually move forward with work. You might not move forward with the development of a product because you're trying to be all things for all people. But it's just kind of like, think about within this archetype that I've created, what are the variances of identity in that space? So it may not be trying to capture everyone, but it's like, of stay-at-home moms, right? What are the variances of that particular identity that we might be able to speak to, or at least start to find the through lines that kind of exist among all of those identities? Right? Because it's like, is it the same for white moms? Is it the same for, Latinx moms? Is it the same for Black moms? Is it the same for, moms of children with disabilities, or mothers who have like a disability, themselves, that are all within like this age range? And that's one of those things that you can start to do to expand a little bit more, and to, just to broaden that world just slightly. And think about like the language that you need to include in that space. So it's not everyone, it's not the entire world, but it is an expansion of that little microcosm that you're trying to, and as you grow, then you can start adding more avatars, to it that are beyond what you might be the most knowledgeable about yourself. Because I do think it's important that you do speak from a space that you are familiar and that you do know best, as far as like, being successful in whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So there's reality to that, but this is just one of those ways that you can start to expand that. And
I think our sudden love affair with personal brands, right? How we are not just the Oprah show, we are Oprah, and Oprah has many things going on. And that kind of reality now with social media, and be able to create these online profiles and then sell different programs and packages. I think having that differentiator in your mind of like, what I sell or my high ticket program is for this specific avatar, but my brand and who I want to inspire or connect with, or just have tune into my Instagram live, whatever, that's where you can start speaking to some of those other through like experiences on the through line, I think is what I'm hearing. And really the breakdown is focusing less on demographics, like white mom, 45, 140 pounds in, Delafield, Wisconsin, versus stay-at-home moms who have some of these like shared psychographics
Yep.
of how they feel about themselves, what they think at night, how they wish goldfish would clean themselves up. I don't know yet, but that's,
Yeah.
this
No,
demographic
100%.
versus psychographic. I think psychographic is what you can be thinking about when it comes to this inclusivity.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I love that distinction of, just because I do think that there are certain, types of characteristics that tend to be a little bit more universal, like than others. So I would love to see people kind of shift a little bit more toward, psychographic avatars as opposed to specifically demographic avatars. Because I also think that your unique experience, like being able to speak from your own, kind of experience is actually valuable in diversity, right? And I think that sometimes people, have a hard time understanding, like that. But it's like, how do I, from my experience, interact with people that come from different groups? So that, because the more familiar that I get with other, groups and other experiences, the more easy it becomes for me to speak to those types of things and to relate my experience to those individuals. So I'm not saying that you got to be, an expert on everybody's, kind of like experience, but being familiar with the variances in identities really empowers you to be able to speak to those, those types of variances, when people are kind of like entering your space, because they might have a different interpretation of but it's still like of what you're offering, but it still might be useful, like to them, and being open and willing to engage in that part of the discussion and being able to say, oh, you know what, actually, this is a slight variation that you can do that would actually make this help you in whatever, particular area that you're talking about. I know from like most of my clients might use it this way, but I've also seen it done this way. And the more like that provides you with so much, like kind of like flexibility and an ability to kind of pivot and, and be inclusive, wherever possible.
I love that advice. And I feel like that's starting to happen for me without really realizing in some ways. So we recently started doing done for you copywriting, where I'm basically like ghostwriting, helping people, with their websites and things like that. And I started to feel really insecure as we were getting clients that were not white life coaches, because that's what I am and that's what I know. Okay. And so we started getting, different people and different topics and like investing and like all these things. I was like so insecure because I was like, little old me does not know about investing that way. Like I can do a market research and all of that. And what I realized is that when I put it on myself, that spotlight effect of like, I have to carry this burden, I have to figure it out. That's when I felt insecure. But when I did what I think you're kind of saying here, when I started to look around at other people and I got curious about, hey, wait, actually my friend from college knows a lot about investing. Like, and again, it's more of this like psychographic, not necessarily that they had the same identity, but they had these shared experiences. And so now we're building this team of other writers so that when, one of our clients came and said, hey, we're doing this career workshop for people of color, I was like, I'm not gonna be the one to do that. Like, we're gonna get the team member in who knows how to speak to that experience and that audience. And so what I'm wondering if one of these takeaways that you're saying or what our listeners could be doing is to keep growing your network and to keep being curious about other people's experiences and identities and perspectives and let them own that if it's not your own. I mean,
absolutely. And absolutely. I do think that it extends to, to networking, but I think it actually, it's one step earlier than even being able to do that. Because the more familiar that you become with it, the faster you'll be able to spot those opportunities, of where to network. Because you're like, all right, so maybe I've got a company, that we do hair care products, or something like that. And it's like, okay, I don't necessarily know how to speak to all of the things, dealing with like ethnic hair, but because I'm familiar with the fact that it's different and I'm familiar with some of the particular, challenges or things that people find important in that space, I know which specialist, I know how to look for that specialist to partner with. I know how to be like, okay, so we're having a session on curly hair. Like, let me make sure that I've got somebody who can actually speak to this from this particular,
Yeah.
experience. And it's not just like, I'm just ask somebody Black, right? Because
Yeah.
that Black person might not, like, I might not be the right person for it, so, but so it helps you kind of like hone in on how your product relates to the general audience. So your own familiarity and curiosity, like you were saying, of like getting to know more and understanding like this is how this might be received differently from a different group, doesn't mean that you have to be the expert on it, but familiarity with it is going to equip you to know when to call for backup. Eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good. Familiarity and really self-awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to use a few minutes to talk about team building as well as just kind of like thinking and marketing, because a lot of our clients and people that listen to this show are starting to hire people and think about, really building that organization beyond just the brand, I guess. And so I wonder what advice you have when it comes to, finding the right person, but also gaining perspectives and gaining expertise on your team so that we're not all just, the same people with the same ideas working together. I've been in some of those places and it makes sense. We get each other, we have the fit, but then we always just agree and we make the same mistakes and we don't challenge each other or really like give each other feedback. So solopreneur looking to start growing a team. What advice would you give them? You're in the elevator. What do you say?
Right.
Pressure's on.
This one's super practical. It is understand what you need the person to do. Understand what is required for the role. Understand, so that everything, as far as like when you're trying to find more people or people to fulfill a role, that you're only trying to fulfill, like you're relating it to the person's ability to perform the job. A lot of times when we go into trying to build a team, we're just looking for somebody that connects with us, and we want them to be like a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades.
Or who is our friend.
Or who is our friend, or those types of things. So this is actually a challenge that is really, really important, because it's going to, like, especially as your business scales, your ability to kind of hone in on what you need each role to do. It actually, allows you to create great parameters for hiring. And when you focus on recruiting people, you're not focusing on, like you're saying, that fit, that cultural fit. You're actually qualifying them on their ability to perform the job. And that opens up a whole world of, of people. And then just like understand that, from different places, like don't underestimate the fact that values can differ. And sometimes it just takes a commitment to trying to communicate and to understand as you build your team, and realize that, I'm not going to make the assumption that everybody's looking at it the way that I am. I'm going to see that actually as a competitive advantage, and I'm going to build that into the way that I communicate with my team. Is not leading with an assumption that you get what I'm saying, or that you're looking at it the same way that I am, right? Because their previous experience or their, point of view might get kind of squashed, down if you're not leading with, all right, let's come into this. This is the way that I see it. How do you see this? Is that tell me the way that you're, looking for it, and create those parameters and a comfortable space for people to be able to, to speak up and to provide their feedback. And sometimes you have to do that formally, because there are certain, people, certain cultures and certain groups that, wait for that moment. They wait to be asked for it in order to interject, because they might see it as rude, to interject their opinion when it's, when they're thinking it's your show, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just trying to be conscientious of creating, don't come in with an assumption. Try to formalize and standardize wherever possible, and try to keep things focused on one's ability to perform the duties of the job, which does require that you do a little bit of research and understanding exactly what you look for and what you need, and what's necessary for the success of your business at that time. Yeah. And that tends to open up those doors.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So really clear on what the role needs to create, what the functions you need to have filled. Because I totally see entrepreneurs like, oh, well, my friend needs this like part-time job, so I'm trying to put together stuff for them. And it's like, you're saying like, no. Like you need to know what your parameters are.
Correct.
And then find the people that fit into those needs and that structure. And the other piece that I'm really taking note of, a leadership lesson you said, is to be open to kind of throw out like, I only know my own perspective, right? I am not all being or all knowing just because I'm the CEO or just because
Correct.
It's my show, like you said. And really, I love that culture. And I think that's really helpful for solopreneurs and myself, who has a small and mighty team, to show up and say, I don't have all the answers. I only have my perspective. And you're here because I'm curious in your perspective too, I'm not just trying to teach a bunch of mini Hannahs to be mini Hannah.
Exactly.
Really good. Really good. So before we just, chit chat all day here, time is flying.
We could, right?
It's always a blur, these conversations. I love it. So I am curious, for folks that want to like continue this conversation with you, Jimi, and learn more about your work, how can they stay connected or learn more about you?
It's I think like the easiest way is like on Instagram. So my handle is at Jimi_Vaughn, and I spell it like Jimi Hendrix. So JIMI_VAUGHN, or you can find me like on JimiVaughn.com to just know a little bit about like some of the keynotes and other types of coaching types of things that I do.
Amazing. We'll make sure we have links to Jimi Vaughn on the interwebs. And again, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom and insights to all of us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So listeners, I'll be back next week with another inspiring guest that will help you make your dream life your real life here on the podcast. That's right, friends. That'll do it for our show today. But remember, if you're really ready to implement and take these ideas into action, then hop on over to dreamlifeisreallife.com/show, and you can access all of the resources we talked about, and more importantly, set up a complimentary 10-minute phone call with my team so that we can help you get clarity and some concrete action steps in place, so this doesn't just become another one of those feel-good moments, but an opportunity to actually make a change in your life and business, because all good things come in action. So we'll see you over there at dreamlifeisreallife.com/show, and next week here on the show.